Shall we?
Let's do it.
Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for OUA football. Me and Tom are back on the mics to set up week 8 in the OUA season. Tom, it's been a little while since we did a preview pod, a proper preview pod, as last week we were live and direct for our second attempt at the Game Day Live. It's the Thanksgiving slate of games, 4 beautiful Friday night games coming your way this week. And we're going to do a little standing prognostication as we come down to the end of the season. But we'll get to all of that first. Tom, how the heck you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, my man. I'm doing great. Speaking of the Thanksgiving season here, as always, I'm thankful for all the folks who are listening to us, who tuned into us on the Game Day Live, who noticed the awesome setup that we were able to have with the teams warming up in the background, with the stadium in the background. So it was such an incredible experience having that Game Day Live at a homecoming. And I just appreciate everybody who always supports us. So thank you for everything that all of our listeners and all of our fans do for us.
It was an excellent Evan Hillock homecoming day. And,
Hmm.
shout out to the folks. I'm going to butcher the name of Colquitlam, British Columbia.
Hmm.
Our highest single city producing listen producing city. Goodness gracious, the words they escape me. Me and Tom were doing some math before we started recording, so it's going to be an interesting one. The folks of British Columbia, salute to you. Thank you for tuning in. C to C
Thank
to
you, Coquitlam.
Oh, there we go. So we got 4 games all at 7 p.m. on Friday. Normally we complain when they all wind up at 1 o'clock, but when it gives the players and the coaches an opportunity to spend time with family for Thanksgiving, I am not going to complain. So starting with the order they're in on the website, we will go Guelph taking their talents to the York Lions Stadium. 7 p.m. kickoff from York Lions Stadium here. We have Guelph coming in off of that huge win against Windsor at home. We have York coming in off of a huge win at home versus Waterloo. Guelph at 5-2, York at 2-4. We were kind of joking, especially when we have the Waterloo Warriors taking on Mac. We have a funny kind of like proxy war of the old Mac Guelph games, because in this one we have Knox versus Guelph, and then of course, as we'll get to, we'll have Kevin McNeil versus McMaster again, like old time's sake. I want to start with the emotional high that both these teams are coming off of.
Mhm.
Um, and on the one hand, to my Guelph Griffins, your Guelph Griffins, everybody's Guelph Griffins, hey, they made a statement, not just with the win, but literal statement afterwards being like, it's not an upset. So on the one hand, you know what? The comment I want to make of like coming off of an emotional win. Hey, maybe, well, hey, if it's not an upset, I mean, it's a great win, it's a great finish. But hey, if you just took care of business, right, then it shouldn't be a big deal. And York, for them, of course, really exciting game on their homecoming, taking out Waterloo. When you measure in the emotions both these teams were coming in to this game with based on their last outings, how do you factor that in with this game? Because just by the numbers, and I don't think we'll surprise anyone with our picks, especially not me, of course, but the the emotions of these teams coming off of these major games. What do you make of that standpoint with these two clubs?
Certainly something that you have to acknowledge when you're looking at both of these squads here. I mean, first off, you look at Guelph and almost everybody on the at the 55 pickers picked Windsor to beat them, except for yourself, you beautiful, brilliant man,
Go
you.
Griffs.
Go Griffs. So from that standpoint, and certainly from the standings at bare minimum, Guelph is looking at this like, no, we deserve to be thought of as better than this. And coming off of this, I'm sure it's a major confidence boost in terms of this was the number one defense in the land and we just put up 45 points on them. This is a statement win at home, considering especially what happened last year, where Windsor ran all over them and they were able to do pretty much anything they wanted here. I think that's a big statement win for the program and just gives them a boost of confidence going into what is their last game of the season. Against York before they have their week 9 bye. So certainly riding something of a high there for York. I'm sure it's very similar in that regard where you get your second win. The first win must have been such an elation, such a major feeling that way because it's the first win in over 1,000 days, something along those lines. I'm sure that was an incredible setup there for them. But for the second one, I think it's a little bit more confidence for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's some relief in there as well to say we got the second win, we've got the lion decal on our helmets, we've got confidence now, we can actually do this as a yeah. We're not the team that we were last year. We are a new team. This is a new vision. This is a New York Lions under Coach Dexter Janke and the rest of that coaching staff. We're here. We are legit. Let's get back into business. So I wouldn't be surprised if obviously both of these are emotional, but Guelph is more of a this is a confidence, this is who we are, whereas York is very much a we got our second win of the season. This is awesome. We are not the team that we used to be. Relax, not relax, but have that sigh of relief that you've grown, but still there's a lot of work left to be done.
Most certainly. And it's interesting because this York team, I feel, and we're going to talk after we finish the previews of the episodes about the standings in general, but I think it's impossible to not bring it up in some context to think about where these teams are at sort of in their headspace. Because I feel like for York, they're, if just looking from the outside, their MO has kind of changed on the year because you go into this year thinking like, hey, look, we're developing, we're growing, it's a new culture that we're setting, we're earning our stripes, we're earning our decals. Well, check and check. And as we'll get into in greater detail, if you're over there at York and you're saying, okay, we raise the bar now, the bar you're shooting for is saying, well, fellas, we can still make playoffs. And it is still in your hands. If you win out, you make the playoffs. And of course, that involves beating Guelph and then going on the road to take out McMaster. And those are tall tasks, more the former than the latter, if I may say so myself. But you look at it and you say, we went earlier in the season. You think about how we're clamoring like, our guy Sean Law, like he's not getting reps out there. And it makes sense from some standpoint. You have a young kid, Matt Lynn, transfers in from Waterloo. You have a young club, you're building your culture, and you say, hey, look, Law, again, if I'm just trying to like paint a picture of what might have been some conversations, hey, Sean, like you'll get reps, we'll get you into some games, um, but at the end of the day, this is you came here knowing that this is a rebuild and everything like that. We want you to help this young kid mature and everything like that. And he's a competitor. Obviously, he still wants to play. But as we saw in that Waterloo game, because obviously they knew going into that one, much like the U of T one, this is a winnable game, a capital W winnable game right here. And maybe Matt Lynn was hurt because we don't even see him at all, even though, of course, Sean Law is cooking. The stats don't even show that necessarily. He was clearly over 200 yards passing as the 4 touchdowns. He was balling out there. So I don't know. Matt Lynn might have been in the participation. It's just like, well, you know what? If your guy's going, like, why would you go to another dude? And Sean Law's so big that it's kind of like if you had a short yard situation, you wouldn't bring in the younger, smaller of the two quarterbacks. So what I'm interested to see for for York is to think that even if they lose this game, we'll go into all the machinations. They can still make playoffs if they lose it. So not knowing Matt Lynn's status, but I'm curious to see, do we get another Sean Law outing here? And, we obviously saw the incredible things he did last week. A different administration at Guelph than his time there. But we talk about the Knox revenge game, if you will, against Guelph, even though Knox kind of got the better of us in those matchups back in the day. Bit of a Sean Law revenge game from his, I don't want unceremoniously kind of makes it seem like he was doing something wrong. And by all accounts, he didn't do anything wrong while he was there other than just be that half man, half jugs machine that he is. But again, I'm curious to see sort of the attitude, the aggressiveness that they play. Because if you're going to have a chance to beat Guelph, like York right now, they're giving up about 28 points a game. It, it You're not going to slow them down. You have to somehow keep up with their scoring. And we've seen positive things from Alunga on the ground. We've seen positive things with Avante on the ground as well. But it's almost like that Laurier game last week against Queens, where it's like, hey, Queens played well, sticking to their guns and running the ball. And there was a couple nice plays in the air. But at a certain point, that offense you were going up against was just too hot to handle. So I think this is going to be an interesting game just from the standpoint of if it is Sean Law in there, I think he does give them the best chance to win it or make it competitive. And he threw it 37 times. Again, assuming that's even accurate, because the stats obviously are entirely true here. But he threw it 37 times. It's going to have to be at least that number. And can Avery Ford, can Jaron Hartenstein, can Melchizedek Longa, Hardesty, I should say, all these guys that he was connecting with last week, can they replicate some of that fire they had? Because there's no other way. There's no other way this win comes to fruition other than, again, just the pure like, oh, they well fumbled every kickoff and so on and so forth. This
Mhm.
has to be a game where if you're thinking, hey, we go in this to win, we've earned our stripe, we've earned our logo. It's Sean. Check your watch, fellas. It's Sean Law time.
Well, in the one game that Sean Law has played, now yardage is we can't look at that because they were all kinds of messed up. We got confirmation on that for whatever reason the yardage is off on there. So yardage we can't go for, but in the 5 games previously that Matt Lynn started, he threw one touchdown pass and seven interceptions to our guy Sean Law's 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions in one
Hell
game.
yeah.
Now, yes, it's against Waterloo, and maybe you can say, Matt Lynn was playing against whatever else. Regardless, Sean Law's the guy who with the hot hand. Now, I looked through the participation. Matt Lynn was not participating, so it's
Yeah.
it's fair to say that he probably had an injury, which is why this kind of came about. But even if he doesn't, and let's say that York is just trying out a new quarterback because they want to try it out. If that's the performance that you get from Sean Lull, I think you say, let's ride the hot hand. Let's see if he can replicate this. Bare minimum, you give Sean Lull a half. If he really doesn't perform, whatever, sure, maybe you go back, but I don't think that that's the case. I think you start utilizing the strengths that Sean has. And even in the idea of let's try to spread the defense out. Previously, last year, with a lot of these similar guys that Guelph has, they struggled in the back end in the defensive secondary. So use that big arm from Sean, take a couple of risks, bomb the football down the field, see what happens. You still have a guy in Avante McCoy. You've got outstanding receivers there. Throw up the ball, let them see if they can go get it. Just try it out from that standpoint. So I think that based off of the performance that we saw, even if Matt Lynn is healthy, I think Sean Wall is the guy in this one. Certainly lots of emotion. Now, obviously, the previous administration, there is the offensive coordinator is still there from Guelph, but I don't believe that's who our guy,
Yeah.
Mr. Law, had the issue with. But still, just a vendetta against his time there. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is a very personal game for our guy in Sean Law against Guelph, even if the main person is not there anymore. But once again, we talked about kind of a case study last week of how Queens tried and failed to get under Mr. Elgersma's skin.
Mm.
If you get too emotional, especially as a quarterback, you start making boneheaded plays, you start trying to force things because you really want to do something, you start making mistakes that way. So I know Sean Law to be a pretty even keel and cool headed guy. So let's see what he can do if he stays in that regard. But regardless how you look at this, even if you want to give certain advantages elsewhere, this is a mountain for the York Lions to climb against Guelph, especially after such a dominating win against, at the time, the league's #1 defense in the land.
Most certainly. And from the standpoint of York's defense, obviously we saw Brody Clark was banged up last week, and just hoping all the best for him that he's good, because that's a big shot to this defense. And I just think of, again, from the standpoint of like, can York keep up with them? Well, if they're down a guy like Clark in that defense, then I don't know how you do it. And so flipping over to Guelph offensively, because they've been so tremendous. And again, last week McCray goes 21 for 27, 2 touchdowns, nearly 300 yards passing. He's getting the ball around. Kane Stevens is back in the Stevenson. Goodness gracious, is back in the mix for them. He's doing great things at all levels and receiving and running and blocking. The thing I'll be interested to see is that we've seen this team for Guelph offensively with Coach Saria, the equal a mad scientist to Coach Greg Knox, the mad scientist on defense, and how he's mixing things up. But they've been banged up on offense, and we've obviously seen a lot of growth from them, especially in Tristan Aboud, the way that they've utilized Marshall McCray, a lot of these option looks. Week 9 bye, and I'm pretty certain they're hosting a playoff game. We looked at that already. That they are going to lock. They have locked in the playoffs. That is for certain. They are going to the dance. It's the last opportunity against a real opponent. And yeah, York is a real opponent, right? It's not, this isn't any of the years leading up to this. This is a real test to be able to see if we want to tinker, if we want to see, hey, man, Isaiah Smith, like, come on, like, let's get him like some rhythm going. Let's try whatever you want to mix up. Or will Guelph have just said, you know what, at this point, whatever we have in right now is what we have in, and we're going to save the tinkering for the playoffs. From that standpoint, if you're in that Guelph locker room and in those coaches' meetings, because you have been. So you have some familiarity with some of the people that are there. You're going into week 8. So your last game of the regular season. You've locked up playoffs and almost certainly locked up a home playoff game. You're looking at a lesser opponent and you're saying, okay, we've shown so many things offensively. Dual quarterbacks, guys coming back from injury, all this diversity that we have here. Isaiah Smith hasn't gotten going. What's the one thing you really want them to be doing? Is it adding in a new wrinkle that we haven't seen thus far this year? Is it getting a guy like Isaiah Smith going that we haven't seen really take off this year? Or is it just saying we're going to play vanilla and we're going to not put anything, we're going to limit what we're putting out on tape from this one and just know that we're going to stay healthy. We're going to have that week, that extra bye week, and we're going to get ready for the first round of the playoffs, whoever comes to Royal City.
So Guelph is in something of an interesting spot when it comes to this regard, because like we mentioned, there isn't a scenario where even if and spoiler alert, we are going with Guelph to win this game.
Yeah, yeah.
But even
Surprise.
if there is a scenario where York comes out with the unbelievable upset victory here, Guelph still finishes 5-3 no matter what they get into the playoffs. Guelph has the week 9 bye. So if there was ever a time for the mad scientist on offense and Coach Mark Soria to put in a new wrinkle to do something, it's 100% on the bye week before you get into the playoffs here. So I wouldn't be surprised if going into this York game, it's very, not necessarily vanilla, but it's very much their core of who they are offensively at bare minimum. You're still going to see that two quarterback system. I wouldn't be surprised to see Marshall McCray actually throw it a little bit more than he normally has to try some things out and see if he can't get into a little bit more of a rhythm in the passing game. But I think it's very, very basic to who they are and it is their core philosophy. Wouldn't be surprised if going into next week, maybe it's a certain things that they've done once or twice previously in some games, or maybe something that they've practiced in training camp and a little bit throughout that they really start to lean on here. Maybe going into that wishbone style package with a Marshall McCray option, not just in the red zone, but in midfield and in other places. Maybe that's something else that they kind of bring out. But given the fact that they have the playoffs locked in, they're probably, I mean, we'd have to really, we didn't do a deep dive into this because once again, it's very, very unrealistic, but they probably have a home playoff game, even if they lose. So you're at home, even though you have everything else going on. I think. Anyways, that gives you a little bit more time, a little bit more freedom to really put in something new, depending on what else that Coach Soria can really think up here. I think going into this game, you flex your muscles a little bit more. You showcase that you obviously that Windsor win wasn't just a fluke. You really establish the run. You get that going, and then after a couple of scores, if you are able to get up big early on, maybe you start experimenting a little bit. Maybe you go, hey, Isaiah Smith, you're going to get 50 yards rushing if we have to run the ball 50 times for you to get one every time, and really just try to get that young man established and get him as many reps as possible. But I think in this one, you're not going to see anything flashy from Guelph. I think it's going to be their core stuff and they're going to be successful in it.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. And of course, yeah, with that week 9 bye, you get the opportunity where like if Kane at one point, if he's you know what, he's just not feeling great. All right, son, take a rest. You're done for the day. Vashon, we've seen banged up a bit. Obviously, with a guy like Isaiah Smith, we know he's coming off of injury. Donovan Malloy was injured earlier this year. Again, like not to be taken for granted how dominant they've been on offense, despite all the adversity they've picked. But nonetheless, on the picks, we're both going with Guelph. Anything else you want to speak on with this one, Tom?
I think going into this game, the messaging from Coach Janke and the rest of that coaching staff is absolutely going to be if you win the last two games of the season, we're in. And yes, I'm sure some guys will be thinking, okay, yeah, but if this happens and this happens and this happens, we could still get in even if this doesn't happen. But the message going into this week is win and you're in. Win the last two games of the season and you're in. Just focus on that. There's nothing else that exists here. there is, spoiler alert, there is a scenario where even if you lose this game, if you go into the next week and something happens, you could still get into the playoffs here. So I would not be surprised as if even if something isn't working, or even if this game gets out of reach at a certain point, that York is still doing things almost in preparation for their last game of the season to say, hey, remember when we ran this twist, and remember when we did this blitz and it didn't really work out against Guelph because of this, this, and this. Let's clean this up this week so that in week 9 it goes perfect in that regard. So wouldn't be surprised if that's in the back of some coaches' heads going into this one either.
Yeah, first of all, to the York players, leave all the machinations of if you lose and you win and this, and if they win, leave that up to us because we're already going batty thinking about it. And no doubt it'll get more complicated as we actually get into week 9. To your point, though, about that potential matchup, let me just put this out there into the ether to York, to the York contingency. Regardless, when you roll into McMaster with a possible win in your in situation, hook me up with a York Lions costume and I will be there in head to toe York mascot gear. Let's go, Lions. Though I'm not
Oh,
taking it over my Griffins. We got the Lion Eagle combo taking out the mere line in that one. Speaking of your McMaster Marauders, Tom,
oh gosh.
they're also playing Friday night, 7 o'clock when they head over to the Kitchener Waterloo region to take on the Waterloo Warriors. Waterloo, obviously, as we mentioned, coming off of that emotional loss at York on their homecoming. Mac, what do you want to say about it? They lost on homecoming to Western. I want to start with the Waterloo side of things. Again, going to that game, it's now been the second week in a row that we've seen Nolan Caban at quarterback for them, a guy who's, we've gotten familiarity over the years with him and his first year and really a gunslinger type guy. And in the game against York, he was 21 for 40, 183, no touchdowns, no interceptions. They capitalize on some sloppy play by York early. Anthony Miller really gets going. Quentin Springer has a good game. They both find the end zone. Miller looked like he got banged up. Other than that, he's Caban's finding his guy like Basiliga, like Logan Haru, Samuel Slocum. But yeah, this is a team in Waterloo that they're coming in pretty banged up, and B, man, that was a sloppy game. That was a sloppy game. It was late in the game too. You could see when Coach Burke called the timeout. And I think it was right before I think York scored their last touchdown to pull away. And you could see he's just rallying the troops, just talking to his defense. And he doesn't put up with that. He's not going to put up with that type of sloppy play. And it's just unfortunate because again, it's a team where we're seeing so much talent. And there's a real possibility that they leave the season without a win for Waterloo. We'll get into again the deep playoff conversation later. They have been eliminated from playoff contention. I'm pretty sure we've done our due diligence in looking at that. They cannot sneak in by hook or by crook. With that being said, that makes for prime time spoiler alert coming up for the Waterloo Warriors. And as I was saying, Kevin McNeil has had some battles with the McMaster Marauders. Unfortunately, with our Guelph Griffins being on the losing side of some of those. On the other hand, you have Matt coming in, having gotten the Western came into their house. What's the whole thing? They kicked their dog, they ate their lunch, they all these things, right? And so they're coming in pissed off, right? Their destiny's still in their hands, much like you said with York. What do you make of this matchup? It's a game where I think there's the, don't think about it too hard. Favorite in the game, but there's a lot of like things that could go on that could make this a weird game.
Yeah. To be perfectly honest with you, coming out of that game, obviously, no matter what the scenario is, anytime you lose 61 to 20, 29, 26, anytime you lose big like that, it's always going to be a disappointing. But especially thinking back on it and just really kind of mulling this game over, McMaster coming off the bye week going into this game, there's not a certain, maybe you could say that the passing game looked a little bit better because they were marching at certain points. But other than that, there's not a single position, there's not a group that I saw, wow, that's much improved, or wow, what a good game plan here, or this happened here, or whatever else. Now, certainly chalk that up to, like I mentioned on the review pod, Western playing some of their best football and executing at a high level. But typically speaking, when you have a bye week, certainly later on into the season at the midway point or further, you can see, hey, wow, that offense really looked rejuvenated, or the special teams unit, they brought something else out that was a little different. This defense just showed a 30 front when they've only ever shown 40 or 50 or something along those lines to really utilize that. From the outside looking in, especially from that Western game, I can't pinpoint what it was that McMaster was really focusing on and what they really focused on to get better out of this one. So from that standpoint, once again, like I said, playing against Western, against the tip top shape Western, that certainly has a factor into it. But if you really want to make a push here, and once again, there's a lot of scenarios here. There's a lot of things that could happen, whatever else. McMaster, you take all of that off the table if you win out. If Mac finishes 4-4, you're in the playoffs no matter what. No more ifs, ands, or buts. You're in. So take care of business. And I'm sure that's the exact message that P is telling everybody here. We've had some tough breaks. We've had some close games, lots of frustrations here. You win two more games in the end part of the season, you get to go into the playoffs and potentially rewrite some of the losses that you had against certain opponents. So that's certainly the messaging. How they execute, still up in the air.
I totally agree. I feel like we were talking with some of the Mac folks and parents after the game, and it's kind of like you just kind of shrug and you say, "Hey, like yeah, we'll watch the film, we'll get better from it." But otherwise, like you just on to Waterloo, on to York. Like what do you want to say about it? Right? That was awful. And the thing I'm going to be interested to see in this matchup is we've seen Waterloo, and to no surprise, because we're both very familiar, as a lot of people are, with how Coach Kevin McNeil coaches up his defenses. They're really aggressive. Now on the season, what's a bit surprising is they've only got to the quarterback 6 times, and 4 of those belong to their safety half. I don't know exactly where he slots in, but Anesu Latmore, hey, you lose a guy like Tyson Hergott, your pass rush is going to suffer a little bit. But I find that an interesting stat when it's a team that's so aggressive. I go back to that week 1 matchup again when U of T is so sharp and being able to just get the ball out quick to their guys like Chris Joseph, to Jake Oseen and these guys like that, and just say, hey, look, cover 1 man situations or even zero at times and or what have you, and just let your playmakers make plays. For Mac, they have one of the best quarterbacks in Canada. They have so many weapons. And again, it's that interesting thing where on the one hand, you face an aggressive team. You might say, hey, look, maybe we have to go into a 7-man pro. Maybe we have to do a +1 if they're bomber. If they're adding in extra guys, we bomber a guy in. Or maybe you say, okay, you want to stack the box. Guess what? There's 5, 6 guys out here, and we have deep, medium, short concepts, hot routes all across the board. And we got a guy who knows how to read a defense as good as anyone else. So I'm curious, just again, with a Waterloo team who's had trouble getting to the quarterback. Now, of course, this is a Mac offensive line that, it isn't one of the best in the league this year either. But you say, man, you've really only found success getting to the quarterback with your Will have fires, bringing Latmore off the edge, and he's been outstanding. I would love to see this kid pick up an OUA All Star award this year. Obviously, I don't know, I can't speak to how he's been in the back end, but just put that aside, you know, it's a tough spot. I'm curious what we're going to see from Coach McNeil in terms of his game plan. If you're in that defensive room, and again, we're offensive players, but if you're trying to say, okay, we got this passing juggernaut. Yeah, they don't have the best protection, but they've shown they can get the ball out quick. They can do all sorts of things with 5, 6 man combos out wide. Do you say, hey, we're going to stick to our aggressive nature? Or do we say, hey, look, let's try and play a little more coverage and just hope that against an offensive line that's not as strong as some of the others. It's a very young offensive line, so it's not even, I'm not even trying to take shots, but it's just, again, it's just the nature of that growth that you go through. Can we get home with 4 or 5 and play coverage? Or are you saying that, man, but if you're giving Keegan Hall time, doesn't matter how many guys you drop back, he's going to find a guy. It's a really tough situation for this Waterloo defense in my eyes.
Yeah, I can't help but agree with you on that point. And like you mentioned, other than right guard Taylor Burns, who is in his 5th/6th year, COVID year, all that, and to his credit, has played markedly better than what we saw last year. Not to say that he himself was playing poorly, but he is playing much better at right guard here the rest of that McMaster offensive line is either in the first or second year. So yes, there's certainly youth on that side, but they've played against some of the very best, including both of those tackles playing against Mr. Onyeka in Carlton and not giving up a single sack against that young man. So I think that while this McMaster offensive line is young, certainly they are improved from what we've seen in previous years. I don't think that Waterloo gets home with four. I think they still continue to have to bring that will have fire to send Ansu Latmore to really try to get into Keegan Hall's face to sack him. Now, certainly McMaster has given up sacks with just four guys coming and from that defensive line, most definitely. I don't think that Waterloo gets there consistently with just that. I think they have to send additional pressure to try and confuse that offensive line and try to just overload and get to Keegan Hall. But there is also a scenario in my eyes where Mac goes, okay, let's go max protection here, 70 pro. And yes, maybe there's only three or four guys who are out running routes, but if Keegan Hall has time there to consistently just wait for guys to do their thing, yeah, that's a very tall task for some of those Waterloo DBs to really try to cover those receivers.
Yeah. On the whole, to me, uh, I'm taking Mac. I know, I'm certain you are as well. It's one of those games where I'm taking Mac. If Waterloo pulls it off, I'm not going to be surprised. Like I don't know how that. Well, I don't know. The way I'm more talk into it, you look at it again. Nolan Caban, who wasn't the prime guy for the team going into the year. You look at a guy like Anthony Miller, who's a little banged up off that last game. I don't know where they're gonna find their production offensively in this one. I mean, they'll probably take some shots with Nolan Caban to his guys, but again, we haven't really talked about that Mac defense that again put away the 61 that Western put on them. This is a Mac defense that, like, just throughout this year has been really strong. And again, it would be nice to be able to see what the number was before what Western did on them, because right now they're giving up 30 points a game. No doubt, obviously, I'm not a math magician, but that number was quite lower before that game last week. They're doing a decent job in their pass coverage, near 200 yards per game. Rushing is around the same, and again, that's including the fact that they had that monster day put on them. They're doing a good job picking the ball off in the secondary. So it's just all these things we're talking about and how I think they'll move the ball in the air against Waterloo. And just I'm curious to see how the Warriors are going to move it on offense against this defense. Tom, I don't know if you have anything. We didn't really talk about Mac's defense, though. Obviously, they're at their best. They're one of the best. But it's Mac in this one, I think.
I think so as well. I think McMaster does end up taking this one. The one thing that I will be interested to see is where is Mitchell Price? Is
Great
he
call.
is he healthy yet? And if he's not, is he going to come back at all this year? Because while certainly I don't think I'm shattering anybody's expectations when I say Western's run game is better than Waterloo's run game. Right now, Waterloo's run game has certainly gotten better and better as the weeks have gone on. And if Anthony Miller is healthy in this game, I think he's a real problem if Mitchell Price is not in. We've seen this offensive line for Waterloo. And while certainly there's certain pieces on there that may be struggling at times, Ethan Calra is still right guard on that side. Now, obviously, there's all five guys that make up an offensive line, not just one, but they have some guys who are able to move some bodies, and we know Anthony Miller is pretty damn good at finding gaps and finding holes. If McMaster continues to not be able to stop the run effectively with their front five or their front seven, Waterloo might hang around a lot longer than what everybody may think because of that. But I think McMaster's offense and that passing game is going to be a lot to handle no matter what. I still think McMaster takes this one, but if anything, and I hope that this McMaster team doesn't need to hear it. Do not sleep on anybody, especially McMaster. Do not sleep on anybody that you're going to be playing against. How many times has U of T knocked you out of the playoffs when U of T has been not as strong as people have hoped? So take every game seriously and take care of business as an alumni Please.
I don't think Mac's been sleeping after the nightmares they're getting after the Western game. But no, again, the Mitchell Price thing I think is a great point because again, we look at Waterloo last year when they went into that matchup around the same time of the year against McMaster, and that run game had been way more consistent for them with Miller, with Springer, a lot of the same guys, even on that O line, as you said. And it was Mac bringing a lot of pressure that was slowing down the run game. No doubt having Mitchell Price in there is a major boon to that. But again, it's kind of that, we've seen these two teams, at least in Waterloo's offense and Mac's defense, in very similar shapes and shapes in terms of people who are on the line. Obviously, Mac loses a guy like Owen Hubert and Ryan Leader from last year too. So again, that D line that was a really good D line last year. That was a really good D line. But yeah, it's Mac in this one. But I just what we've seen with Mac being kind of the Jekyll and Hyde performance this year, I just would it blow my mind if Waterloo came away with it? No. And with Waterloo heading to Richardson Stadium for their last game of the season, with Queens obviously wanting to really bounce back from their week 7 performance at Laurier, this might be Waterloo's last best chance of getting a win on the season, which would be really good to see. Speaking of, well, no, I don't really have a good transition. Let's go
I was
back to
gonna say,
Toronto. Let's go back to Toronto. Western's rolling into Varsity Stadium to take on the Varsity Blues coming off the week 7 bye. Last time we saw the U of T Blues, they were down in Windsor getting a 50 burger put on their head. And I think less than 60 yards total on offense. Bit of a rough showing for them. And time we saw Western, it was at the Evan Hillock homecoming game in Hamilton. And last week, looking sharp as ever. Tom, much like we said with Waterloo, U of T, unless we really messed it up in this one, they don't have a pathway into the playoffs. Western, on the other hand, and we're going to get to Laurier in a moment. For Western, it's interesting because it seems very likely that Laurier will clinch. And spoiler, with a win this week at Windsor, Laurier can clinch the first overall seed in the OUA, which leaves Western in a situation where it's very likely they'll just do their business. They'll win out. They still have to take on Windsor, and we'll see how Windsor bounce back after their loss at Guelph. And they're obviously, we still have a lot of respect for them. But for Western, it's interesting because for the first time in we should have looked at this before, and obviously it's not written in stone. They won't have that first round bye, and they're playing a team in U of T that, well, it really shouldn't be that hard an undertaking for them to pick up the win, to secure this win, to pick up their 6th win of the season. I'm curious, like we already talked about with Guelph being in a situation where it's like your destiny's already kind of secured. Obviously, they have that bye week still coming up for Guelph. Western has to still deal with a really great defense in Windsor in their last week. I'm going to throw you in the same situation. You're in a coach's room. You're just having, your post practice, your meeting with your guys, and you're saying, okay, like, what's our game plan for this one where, you know, maybe we don't get that first round bye, hosting a playoff game. We still know we're one of the baddest teams out here in the OUA and all of you sports. It's an interesting position for them to be in. I don't expect anything but dominance, but I don't know. It feels a little odd. Maybe it's just because of that standpoint, and maybe I'll try and search through the standings as you do, unless you have this pulled up. But the last time Western wouldn't have had a first round bye. It's a weird situation though.
most definitely. However, even when Western has the first round bye, when they have that locked up, legendary coach Greg Marshall doesn't exactly strike me as a guy to go up to his team and say, okay, well, this is a playoff scenario. If this happens here, we could potentially play this team and we get this by. I think they're very much just, we're going to keep playing our game. We are going to play as best as we can for as long as we can. And we're going to see who we play at the end of the day. It's not going to be okay, so if this happens here, whatever. I don't think that Western really cares all that much. I think they go into this saying, we're going to just take care of business week after week. And realistically, Laurier's last 2 games of the season are Windsor and Carleton, a Windsor team that, while yes, they got spanked off defensively, by that Guelph Griffin squad is still a solid enough team, and playing in under the Golden Arches at the end of the 401 is never an easy task for anyone to get through. And a Carleton squad that markedly typically plays better at home and is very dangerous with their ideas of they have to win their final game of the season to be in any kind of playoff contention. So it's not unrealistic to say that there's a possibility here where Laurier loses one or both of those games. And if that happens, Western wins out. Obviously, they have a very strong case to get into that first spot. So I don't think that Coach Greg Marshall is going into this being like, hey, guys, the point differential here or there or whatever else. I think they're just saying, take care of business, continue to take care of business, and whoever we have to go through, we will eventually see the Laurier Golden Hawks, whether it's in our house or theirs, and we will get some revenge off of the loss that we had.
No, most certainly. And I mean, obviously they don't have to play that game because it's so rare they have to play that game. I did do a little digging in that moment. In 2021, the COVID shortened year, the 6 game season, the OUA East, OUA West, it was Queens ending up undefeated and Western at 5-1. Again, shout out to Sean Law for taking out those big bad Mustangs. Last time before then, Tom, it was 2014 when you and I were duking it out for OUA supremacy that year, where we both had the first round buys, Western in third place that year. I mean, again, you're totally right, and yeah, they're just gonna play their game. And again, at the end of the day, I don't think they care if they're on the road, if they're at home. Like they're gonna do their thing. The offense is so potent, that defense is so good, it's so scary. It's only getting healthier now that we've seen our guy in Kojo Doom back there, and there's all the incredible things they're doing, and that pass rush has gotten so much better. That linebacking core is still extremely strong right now. It's an unfair team, and there's an O line that could possibly be getting healthier. Whatever it is, they're the OUA cheat code for U of T. You said it with York, right? Their philosophy might have changed throughout the year as they realized, okay, look, it's a rebuild, new coach, new systems on O and on D, and we're trying to build culture. We're trying to create culture. We want to earn our stripes. We want to earn our logo. Oh, wait a minute. Shit. We can make the playoffs. And now all of a sudden, you might have that mentality of, okay, I know we talk about building and like that kind of 4 or 5 long-term plan, but hold on a second. Like, not that there's, I don't know how you kind of mortgage the future for the right now in the context of university football. You're not going to like make a trade for like a guy, like a whatever, but that flip switch, U of T, they pick up that great win week 1, and it really, they really haven't matched the how magical that was. That York game even was pretty ugly, though the ending was incredibly stellar, to say the least. We've liked a lot of things that we've been seeing. They've been banged up. Jake Oseen, don't know what his status is. Trying to still find that identity. Caleb O'Donohue has certainly been a really positive spot for them on the offensive side, and him being a redshirt freshman, or a redshirt freshman, and just the reps that he's gotten and going up against the best teams that he's gonna get. He's having his first Western week. That's a beautiful thing. I feel like we should pop in champagne. It's like your bar mitzvah. It's like a quinceanera. It's like, yeah, your first Western week. Like there you
Yeah.
go, Caleb, your first Western week. So winning and learning, winning and learning, winning and learning, right? For this game in specific, like how do you come into this game? How do you prep your team and recognizing like that, look, hey, we know we're not in the playoffs now. You're coming off that bye. Yeah, the back to back, the double Western week, whatever you want to call it, and just what's the messaging? What's the messaging?
I think going into this one, the whole message, the whole time, all you're saying is, let's shock the world. If you get a chance to do this, if you beat Western, no one will ever forget that. No one. We can count on our hands since 2014 the amount of people that have beaten the Western Mustangs in the regular season. McMaster, Guelph, Laurier. That's it. If U of T can beat the Western Mustangs in the regular season, you will be remembered for the rest of time. Hey, Western was 8-0. The last time that they lost two regular season games, that was 2024 when Laurier and U of T took them out. The whole idea, one of the things that I will always remember here when going into some of these championship games, especially the Vanier Cup, Coach Potasic looking at us and saying, there's a lot of uncertainties in life. There's a lot of things that can change. If you win this game forever, even if the cup changes, even if anything else changes, the 2011 McMaster Marauders will be national champions no matter what. That is etched in stone that it can never go away. Same type of thing here. If you manage to beat the Western Mustangs, you will live forever. This will be a team that is always remembered for doing something like that to upset this team. Going into this game, you're telling your kids to play with pride, to understand that this is a chance, this is an opportunity to shock the world. And if you play your best game, you have a chance. It's still a massive task, and I don't know if they're up to doing it, but that's the message going into this. If I'm the head coach saying, if you do this, if you pull this off, you will be remembered forever.
God bless you, Tom, for trying to make the case. You had me. I almost felt a tear coming on at one point there. Man, Tom, like we talk all year about how good this Windsor defense is, and obviously Guelph, that whole piece on when you only have 7, 8 games as we get towards the end of the season. One major outing by an offensive team can really skew those numbers. So yeah, Windsor still is the best defense in the league by a lot of metrics, 17.3 points per game. They're giving up 304 yards total passing and rushing. Western's right behind them, only giving up 2 more points and about 40 yards in total. They've intercepted the ball 7 times, equaling with Windsor. Windsor gets the quarterback better than literally anyone. It's disgusting. But Western also scores points with that defense. And I say all that to say, we've mentioned already, Windsor did terrible, awful things to U of T 2 weeks ago with that defense. Like if we're comparing Western and Windsor, we don't even need to start to talk about the offensive comparison, right? I don't know. I'm not going to try and make too much of this right now. We might be in the house for this one. We're undecided, trying to check out one of our games happening in Toronto this weekend. Love the idea of a night game, Western, U of T, just the pageantry, the colors. It's all going to be great. And I threw that question at you of what's the messaging and what are you building off of this? What are you learning? I I haven't a clue. And maybe that's why I'm where I am and Coach DA's where he's at, because he'll come up with something and it'll get those guys fired up to go in there and believe all the things that you just said. I don't know what to say on it, and I'm not going to say much more about it. It's going to be Western, and again, all I hope to the young players at U of T that just recognize that this is as tough a task as you get. It's your last home game of the season. Go out with pride. To those young guys like Caleb O'Donohue, like Ilya Linney on the defensive side of the ball. Learn from this experience, wear those scars with pride that you'll get from this one, and recognize that, hey, you're going to have positive plays and you're going to have gone through this game and gotten stronger from it. And that's, to me, that's the best I can muster right now. Tom, anything else on this?
No, it's Western in this game for sure. This is a tall task. This is a tough ask. This is a another big game where you could run into the very similar scenario of what happened against Windsor, where despite the fact that you have 76 yards passing and 69 yards rushing, you finish your total offense with 49 yards against the Windsor Lancers. This is going to be a very tough game, but if you can find some nuggets in there, some golden wisdom, some areas that you can build on. Hey, yes, we lost this game, but Caleb O'Donohue is really the guy. This is what he did. Or, hey, Lucas Stoikos, Jack Nyros, we finally got the run game going and they were able to get things done. Awesome. Let's see what you can build off of from this outing, and let's see how you can build towards the future as the U of T Blues.
Amen. Well, we mentioned obviously Windsor and that spiel. Let's head to the end of the 401 under the shadow of the Golden Arches, under the tutelage, the wisdom, the coaching prowess of the Don coach JP Cercelli. The Windsor Lancers return home after a tough loss in the Royal City to the Guelph Griffins to take on the Laurier Golden Hawks. Laurier looking to seal up the #1 spot in the OUA for the 2024 season, coming off a major win against the Queens Golden Gales in week 7. Tom, this ends the now one, two, three, four, five, six, including their bye week stretch that Laurier has spent essentially in their own backyard, taking on as far travel as they'd have to heading out to the end of the 401. A Windsor team that, again, nearly pulled off the comeback, but it had their Superman bleeds moment of recognizing that, man, okay, we faced one of the top teams, and you know what? We had a battle, and we came out on the short end of it all. Again, it's a Windsor team that's beat up offensively, and they still put up some good points on Guelph. For Laurier, they leave the comfort of their home. They're traveling. They have a game, a tough game to end up the season with as well. They go into Windsor. This offense has been so stellar, and we saw an offense in Guelph that's probably not on the level of Laurier, but they're not far from it. Do what they did. If you're Laurier, because we saw it with Western, as we mentioned on last week's pod, on the review pod from week 7, telling some of the folks at Western, hey, by the way, Guelph put 40 plus on Windsor. You could see them start to salivate and lick their chops and rub their hands together just maniacally. I'm certain the folks at Laurier are thinking the same thing. They're going down to Win City to take on this defense that was kind of shown that it's human. We do this thing with Laurier often where we're saying you can attack in the air with the best, you can attack on the run with the best. Attacking this Windsor defense, from what we saw Guelph do, what's on film now, what do you think Laurier's going to do offensively? Or do they just do what they did with Queens and say, hey, you know what? We're playing a strong defense. That's cool. We'll just do a little bit of everything, a little sugar spice and everything nice, and we'll still drop 500 plus yards on you.
Yeah, I think going into this game, the Laurier offense is really going to flex their muscles once again. I don't think that they walk into this saying, okay, this specifically, this is something that we need to do, or this is how we attack this, or this is whatever else. Well, certainly they'll have areas of that. I think it's still going to be within their core of of who they are as an offense. There are times where I've been in certain scenarios in my career, and I'm sure you were as well, where one of your offensive coordinators have come up and said, "Hey, we're going to come at this game with this game plan that's outside of what we typically do, but we can still get after them this way, and we can still get a win that way, or whatever the case." And you've won some of those games, at least I have. I don't think you walk into this game as Laurier saying, okay, here's something brand new out of our offense that we haven't done before that we're going to go into this one and really try to execute on. Going into this game, you say, we have a pretty wide array of what we're able to do offensively in terms of running the ball, throwing the ball, whether it's short screen passes, mid crossers, or deep threats, whether it's running power football, zone football, outside tosses. Really, we've seen Laurier excel at all of those. So within that massive tree of offense that they've already have, maybe they stick to a certain section of that, but it's still the core of who they are in the end of the day there, and they still continue to build off of what they've really seen. I think going into this game, we still see that passing offense really be effective. Taylor Elgersma and that receiving core are not just something that you can just turn off at a moment's notice, especially with how they've been playing recently here. So you still see something go along with that. But I wouldn't be surprised if you see Tanner Nellens be a little bit more involved in the offense than previously. Now, I say previously, he still has 100 yards on the ground in the last game that they had against Queens, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him establish himself a little bit more, for them to lean on him a little bit more, to see the attempts possibly go up into the 20 attempts kind of range, and see Taylor's passing go from 30 attempts maybe down to 25 or so, maybe even 20, something along those lines. I wouldn't be surprised if they try to establish the run a little bit more, but there's not going to be some crazy, we're going to pull something out of our hat here in order to beat this team. That's going to be their core offense, and they're going to see success with it.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing from Laurier, especially because I think there's a great parallel with Windsor and Queens, great defense, run the ball really well, where I don't I think you're right in what you're saying there, but I think kind of like last week, if you're Laurier, I mean, if you're any coach, you want this to be the case. You say, hey, like, let's come out swinging, like let's get a couple majors on the board just so that if we want to say, hey, at the end of the day, when people look at the box score when they review the tape, they're gonna say, hey, this was a day where, yeah, Tanner Nelms and Bassick Hayden really just grinded it out on the ground. If you do that too early, too often, well, guess what? Windsor's going to do the same thing. And this could be a situation where you're going into the half where it's been you know, just an absolute, not, I don't want to call it a rock fight because both these teams run the ball well. It's not just going to be like gain of three, gain of four, punt, so on and so forth. Like these teams run it well. Again, I go back to just how impressive that win was against Queens, where again, Queens moved the ball well. They were moving it on the ground. Anthony Leo had some good plays in the air, opportunistically perhaps at times, but nonetheless, he's making some plays. But Laurier responded every single time. And I keep going back to that Guelph game that made it so impressive. And that Western game too, where unless you're doing what Guelph was able to, which was respond to every punch, every touchdown with a touchdown, every point score with a point score. And for Western, they don't do that like one or two times, and all of a sudden it just you can't keep up. Because for Windsor, obviously it looks like they've gone to Nick Domofsky, and I'm really excited about that. Again, love the idea of the Essex region kid playing for the hometown team, and he has a good game last week against Guelph, going 12 for 15, 140 and a touchdown. At the end of the day, we know that what makes this team special offensively, they have a great defense. They have some really good special teams. Brady Litster, Giovanni Cunningham returning the ball is with Joey Zorn, Christopher John, Wavy Mambo, Liam Talbot. And obviously, you're missing half of that with no Wavy Mambo and no Liam Talbot. I don't think they're going to deviate from that game plan of running the ball. And, like maybe this is the time we bring up the Laurier defense because if they want to say, let's stop the run and make Nick Domofsky try and beat us, well, then they'll make that happen. But again, I think this is that thing we're seeing with Laurier where, all right, hey, look, we're going to come out. We're going to score some points. We're going to get a bit of a lead. So to force them to try and get out of their game plan a little bit, if they want to keep running the ball, great. Now we'll match them. Now we'll start feeding Nelms, and Nelms might still put up great numbers. And hey, maybe we should have done it from the jump, but just, hey, secure that lead. Because as a rushing team, it's tough to play from behind in those situations, force it in Domofsky's hands. I think honestly, like maybe it's oversimplifying it, but just like because again, Windsor's done some incredible things this year. I don't want to undermine that, and especially not with the coaching staff they have. And if all of a sudden they're healthy offensively, and guys like Jalen Miller and Shane Johnson and some of these and Giovanni Cunningham in the receiving core Colby Ginn, what they can make happen, it just feels like Laurier is too damn hot. I said it on the review pod. I'm done nitpicking them in any capacity, whether it's to Thorne, whether it's to Jordan, to Oja Talayo, to Stebbings, to Nelms, to any of these guys. They'll get up a couple scores. They'll start running the ball, and it's just going to be tough to keep up.
Yeah, I have to completely agree with you in that one. Based off of my conversation that I had reached out to Nick Domofsky after the game last week, it sounds like he re-aggravated his hamstring. I don't
No.
know that he'll be in this game. And for the only time that we have really seen that passing offense have the capabilities of what we think it has, it's been Nick Domofsky throwing the ball. Unfortunately, Danny Skelton, Corson Roy obviously has shown some flashes of it. Certainly, the game against Carleton, where they came back and were able to win by 3 points, Corson Roy was able to get some more things done. But unfortunately, Danny Skelton just hasn't seemed to have been the guy for them and really throwing the ball down the field. So I don't know what they're going to do for the passing game if Nick Domofsky is out. I think obviously even if Nick Domofsky is in, you still lean on Joey Zorn and the rest of that run game to really try to establish yourself. But with the possibility of both Domofsky and Liam Talbot being out for this Windsor offense, that is a very big task for the rest of that team to try to combat against the Laurier defense. That is obviously great for sure. Don't get me wrong. But Laurier's defense, the biggest asset that they have is the offense. Because if you just get one or two stops from the Laurier defense, and that's not exactly a miraculous thing to ask for from these guys. Chances are that Laurier has either flipped the field or they've scored a couple of times, especially in the last few games that this offense has really been rolling here. And so now, especially in a team like Windsor, it's outstanding if you have a lead because now you have a great run game to lean on. If you have to start scoring points and you don't have a really solid passing attack and you're from the outside looking in, best quarterback, and one of your best options in Liam Talbot are both not playing, that's a very tall task to beat the number one team in the nation.
Yeah, 100%. And like again, what Windsor does best offensively, and that's I think you mentioned that on the last podcast. That sucks about Domofsky. As also just as someone so young to see him dealing with injuries, just it's frustrating. Still, the thing they do so best is rushing the ball, and they're third in the conference, and that includes games where they've been short. Wavy Mambo now for almost a month. Liam Talbot's been in and out. So again, but they're still third in the province, rushing 211 yards on the ground. But then we flip the script because on the defensive side of the ball, again, we've talked about all the losses that Laurier had, guys who moved on, Ife Onyemendum, Brandon Omanua, Luke Brubaker in the front seven. Man, they're the third best rushing defense. They only give up 130 on the ground. I feel like we talk so much about those losses in the front seven. And then on the flip side, we talk about obviously when you pick up Harner Dollywall, Malik Coates, all these guys in the back end, Ethan Bayfield, just is such a stellar defense. And you look at the numbers and the passing yards are a little bit high on them, but it's like again, because teams have to throw the ball on them, you're gonna get big yardage at some point. Their rushing defense is so good in the middle for them. Obviously, with Ethan Gregorczyk, being kind of the number one dude there for them, it's a pretty nice guy to lean on, to be able to lean on there. But between the element of okay, Windsor rushing for third and the third best, and Laurier being third best in stopping the run, which one's more likely to break? Well, likelihood it'll be somewhere in the middle. I'm likely to trust in Laurier to say, you know what, you got one of the best defensive coordinators in the land. And I trust they'll be able to slow it down. And so I guess we're looking at a Corson Roy game, and we've seen positive things from him with a banged up offense. Again, I made my commitment last week to my allegiance for the Laurier Golden Hawks and just not to doubt them until I actually see it with my eyes this year, because we haven't. Yeah, again, weird things happen in Windsor. And I'm not going to put it past this maybe being an ugly game for whatever reason. Maybe Windsor's going to go to Queens' playbook and say, all right, like, let's sling some mud at Taylor and see if we can get him off his rocker. Well, apparently that doesn't really work either. So, I don't know. There's probably more we can talk about. I'll just say it right here. I'm taking Laurier on the road. They're going to seal up the first round, the top spot in the OUA in a first round bye, and get ready for Carleton.
With how well Laurier has been playing, with how Guelph was able to run and move the ball seemingly at will last week against Windsor, and with the idea that both Liam Talbot and Nick Domofsky are not going to be playing for Windsor, in the best of cases here, and I know Windsor faithful, I love you very dearly. I've been on the Joey Zord train since 2021 when I first saw that young man really break out against the Guelph Griffins way back in the day. I'm going Laurier in this one. It would be a tall task if everybody was completely healthy going into this one, but with a few key injuries at key spots, it ain't gonna happen.
They had 10 more minutes of time of possession in their game against Queens. In a game where they held is like I'm just going back over that box where they held Queens to under 100 yards rushing, and they were slinging the ball downfield. Like Nelms goes over 100, but it'd be one thing if they rushed for like 200 some yards. Oh, sorry, wait, they did rush for some 219 yards. Like again, they're so spectacular right now. They're so good. Yeah, it's outstanding. Tom, those are our weekly picks. Again, only the 4 games happening. We have the Ottawa teams and Queens on the bye. Shout out to those 3. Enjoy your Thanksgiving long weekend. But we're not going to end there. We're going to do a little bit of overtime right now because we spent a bit of time before the pod doing a little bit of maths, getting our algebra in, and thinking of some of the scenarios that could creep up as we approach the end of the regular season. So as it stands, Tom, if you want to take the lead, we know not necessarily the order, but we seem pretty confident in 6 playoff teams. And as we've already mentioned, the fact that Waterloo and U of T aren't going to be making the playoffs. Who are those 6? And then that'll, by process of elimination, lead us to sort of that battle for 7th as we go through week 8 and 9.
Yeah. Let me preface this by saying the majority of all of the playoff scenarios that Zach and I were working on are predicated along the ideas that the 4 teams that we just listed are the winners. And
Yeah.
going into week 9, we have Laurier at 7-0, Western at 6-1, Guelph at 6-2, Windsor at 5-2, Queens at 4-3, Ottawa at 3-4, and McMaster at 3-4 going into this week, with obviously York and Carleton at 2-5, Toronto at 1-6, and Waterloo at 0-7.
Correct.
With that scenario set up, even if the last game of the season, certain teams lose, if all of these teams lose, which is mathematically impossible because there's 6 teams in here, an 11 team league, but if all of them lose somehow, some way, Laurier, Western, Guelph, Windsor, Queens, Ottawa, no matter what, you are in the playoffs. You have made it there
Yes.
by process of elimination.
Ah, ah, ah.
If those 6 are in, and we have already said that Toronto and Waterloo are out, the 3 teams that are on the cusp are McMaster, York, and Carleton. Do you want to walk us through some of the scenarios there, Zach?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, man. Okay, so we're going into the situation where we have in week 9, Mac at 2-5. We have York at, pardon me, 3-4. We have Mac, York. Oh, let's try that again. We have Mac at 3-4, York at 2-5, Carleton at 2-5. For starters, this situation also means that Laurier's locked up the first round bye. They've locked up the number 1 seed, and they're traveling, long travel day, to Carleton to take on a team that's fighting for their playoff lives. Does that mean that they're going to pack it in, that they're going to pull up young Riley Chalmers from Northern Secondary School and say, hey, don't worry about your game against Richview. You're going to go play the Carleton Ravens? Probably not. But is there a possibility that they're not taking it, putting on their AA game, and that's a game that Carleton can take away? Honestly, a full strength Carleton Laurier game, I'd love to see as well. I'm not necessarily picking Carleton, but again, I love me some Carleton Ravens this year. But so there's a possibility Carleton could win that. We have York playing Mac in the last round, in the last week of the season, which again would have Mac at 3-5, 3-4 going to that game. York at 2-5. If Mac wins out, they get it. Simple as that. Mac, you beat Waterloo, you beat York, you're in the playoffs, and possibly even getting that 6th seed. Because Ottawa could still lose out. Ottawa could end up at 3-5, but they have the head against York. They have the head against Carleton. So I'm pretty sure we've covered our bases that there's no way that they would fall out. Mac could slingshot their way into 6, but Ottawa can't fall out. So Mac, you win out, you get 6, and we'll go into head-to-heads. We already looked at it. Ottawa and Mac have the common opponents of York, Carleton, and Waterloo. As of right now, we can't look at who would have the best of those because Ottawa and Mac don't have a head-to-head against one another. So it would have to be, common opponents, this, that, and the third. Might come down to points. You're having fun with us so far? Stay tuned for more. Okay. That's Mac winning out. So let's say Mac picks up the win against Waterloo and they lose against the York Lions in Ron Joyce Stadium, the Greg Knox revenge game, the game that I'm going to be there in a full lion costume if someone can provide it for me. I'm not going to go out and buy one. So if I don't show up in a lion's costume and you're like, you thought you said you're going to a costume, like, you bring one for me, I'll put it on. And men's extra large, roughly. Large, go do a larger. I'm feeling good about myself.
Oh my God.
Let's get to the point. Okay. If Mac loses, we have a situation where both Mac and York will be at 3-5. If Carleton loses to Laurier, it just comes down to Mac and York. York has the head-to-head against Mac. They would have the 7th seed in the playoffs. So again, what I just said there is even if York loses to Waterloo, which is what we're predicting for this week, and even if Mac beats Waterloo, oh God,
Mac beats Waterloo, if York loses to Guelph,
I'm having a tough time here.
Let me step in. Let me step in here, help you out.
Thanks, brother.
even if McMaster beats Waterloo and
Yes.
York loses
Loses
to
to Guelph.
Guelph, there is a possibility if York beats McMaster in that scenario, York is in.
Yes. And oh yes, yes. So that and that's and if Carleton loses, it's just as simple as that. However, here's where the
However,
plot thickens because for my Carleton Ravens coach Corey Grant, your path to the playoffs is still alive. Now, obviously, if Mac and York lose out, well, I guess they can't both lose out because they still have to play one another. Carleton has the head to head against York. So if York beats Mac in that last game, and Mac has also lost to Waterloo, if Mac some ends up at 2-6, and then York and Carleton at 3-5, Carleton, you beat York. Good job by you. You get in the 7th seed. However, as that situation that Tom just presented, Mac is Mac beats
Mac beats Waterloo. They're
Mac beats
currently at 3-4.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah. If Mac beats Waterloo and they're at
Yes,
3-4 and lose to York,
yes,
then York, having lost to Guelph, will be 3-5. Mac will be 3-5. And if there's a scenario where Laurier has beaten Windsor and they don't care necessarily about the last game of the season against Carleton, and Carleton is able to play their best game and win that game, if all three teams are at 3-5, this is where the machinations can really start to kick in.
yes. Thank you kindly. I lost my concentration because I thought my laptop was going to die. The charger wasn't fully plugged in. I think I'm good now. Hopefully, we don't go to black all of a sudden. So we have all teams at 3-5. We then go to common opponents because we have a situation in that case where Mac had beaten Carleton, Carleton will have beaten York, and York will have beaten Mac. So you can't do that little ring around the rosy there. So you go to common opponents. The only team all three of those clubs have beaten are the U of T Blues. In that situation, the York Lions, let me go back to it, beat U of T in the Battle of Toronto, the Argo Cup, the Red Blue Bowl, the Matt Deans Bowl by 2 points. The McMaster Marauders played the U of T Blues, and they beat them by, was it 20, by 29 points, correct?
By 29 points.
The Carleton Ravens played the U of T Blues, and they beat them. Where was it, Tom? Where was it,
Final
Tom?
score of that game is Carleton 42, Toronto 12, which means they beat Toronto by 30 points.
Thank you kindly. So this has been a bad segment by me. If there's a situation where Carleton, York, and Mac are all at 3-5, we think because of having scored one more point in victory over the U of T Blues by the Carleton Ravens, then the McMaster Marauders, that the Carleton Ravens would get the 7th spot, knocking out Mac and knocking out York. Nonetheless, there are scenarios for all three of those teams, including the York Lions, even if they lose that to Guelph this week, to make the playoffs. Tom, that was brutal on my part, but I think we got it all out. What else do we want to mention on this part?
The message for both York and for McMaster, separately, obviously, if you win, you're in. If you win both of your final two games of the season, you are in no matter what. That's the main story. Now, I think that's a little bit of a larger task for York than it is for McMaster here, certainly. But go into this week 8 thinking win your last two games of the seasons and you're in the playoffs no matter what. Nothing can take that away from you. If McMaster, once again, and I believe this is still the scenario as well. We didn't necessarily go through this, but if McMaster loses to Waterloo and then beats York and that opposite reverse, they will still have the head-to-head against York in that 3-5 scenario, and they will still hop in
Because they
into the
will,
playoffs.
because even if Carleton wins, they will have the head to head against Carleton. So yeah, they could lose to Waterloo, they could beat York, they're in. Yes, absolutely, yes.
So that week 9 game for McMaster, regardless of whatever happens this week, if you win that game, you are in. If you don't win that game, there is no scenario where you get in. If you lose to York, either York or Carleton will get in based on what happens in Carleton versus Laurier. Lose the last game of the season against the return of Coach Greg Knox to Ron Joy Stadium, and you will be knocked out of the playoffs here. Those are the final 3 teams that are vying for the last playoff spot.
And Tom, you know what I make of all that if it does come to pass that that Carlton makes it in over that 1 point extra they scored against U of T? That for the third year in a row, U of T will have knocked your Marauders out of the playoffs. Oh my goodness, Tom. Anything
Oh,
else we want to talk about on the standings? I know we're talking about a lot of ifs and buts and this, that, and the thirds, but it always happens at this time of the season. It's fun. It's nauseating, arguably. But anything else we want to cover on that?
going into this, if we're looking at everything here, once again, we talked about how big that Windsor game was against Queens. If Windsor loses the last two games of the season, which going up against Laurier and Western is very
Mm,
realistic, they will finish at 5-3. Queens takes care of business. They finish at 5-3. Windsor has the above. And in that scenario, Windsor is at home and Queens has to travel. How
huge.
massive of a deal that is for if that were to flip and now Windsor does not have the benefit of being at the end of the road and they have to travel and you have to go to Queens. That is game changing in that scenario and such a massive piece to all of this.
And as a reminder, week one, we had Queens go to Windsor. It's a Windsor win 25-21. And, you can say what you want about that scenario. And then that's a game where Jared Kasari is in there healthy. He's getting the ball 21 times, 166 in the air. That's what we really saw. The Bobby Springer breakout game with, picking off Alex Reek a whole mess at the time. But a situation where, yeah, people can say what they want about Windsor. I mean, if you end your season with 3 losses, that's not how anyone wants to go. But you took care of business, picking up your first 5 wins of the season to set you up in a position where even if the worst case scenario comes to fruition, you still end up with a favorable first round playoff matchup at home. So again, to everyone trying to, besmirch the good name of the blue collar gold swagger Windsor Lancers, the Don coach Cercelli doing his thing at the end, the 401, the golden arches. You took care of business. You almost beat Guelph. You have some tough games coming up. Uh, let's not start sleeping on Windsor, okay? To the folks that thought we were sleeping on Western, we're not going to make that mistake for Windsor as well. Tom, final thoughts on any of this nonsense we're talking about, or just the beautiful week of games we have coming up on Thanksgiving?
Yeah, it's going to be an outstanding weekend of football once again. It always is in the OUA because this is the best conference in U Sports. We'll say that once again, and maybe we're a little bit biased, but find me another league where every single game on the docket is as exciting and as fun as the top tier, and I'll show you the OUA because that's what it is. When you look at all of these, obviously there's a lot of things that are on the line here. There's playoff implications. There's number one seeds that need to be locked up, and no game on this schedule is just a gimme anymore. Every team has the capability. Even the 0-7, 0-6, excuse me, Waterloo Warriors have every chance to beat the McMaster Marauders in this one. Windsor has the capabilities to shock the world and to beat the Laurier Golden Hawks into this one. But based off of the trends that we've seen, based off of everything that we know, we think that we have this week correct. And going into week 9, last week of the season, there's a lot of things that could go wrong in this one for a few teams, but it's not over until it's over. Give your all, do not let up.
And as we mentioned, we will be live and direct for either Guelph at York or Western at U of T, still making up our minds on that one. Tom, can't wait to be in the house for whichever game that is with you. It's always a pleasure. Love breaking down all these games. So enjoy your Friday night chock full of OUA football. Enjoy your Thanksgiving long weekend. Enjoy the food, enjoy the family, enjoy the presence of friends and whoever you're willing to spend your time with on this weekend in the presence of us. Thinking of all the things you're thankful for. I'm thankful for talking about OUA football with you as always, and we'll be doing it breaking down weekdays coming up soon right here at 55.